Good morning, everybody, online and in the audience. Those in the back might want to move a bit forward. It feels cozier. The room is slightly oversized for the expected attendance that we have. Welcome from my side, physically, Andreas Rauber, Technical University of Vienna. And I'll hand over to Sandra Gesing, who's joining us online and whom you can see on the screen over there. Sandra?
Thank you very much, Andreas. Yeah, I'm Sandra Gesing. I'm the Executive Director for the US Research Software Engineer Association, and I'm a senior researcher at the University of California, San Diego, in the San Diego Supercomputer Center. And additionally, do you see still my screen? Something happened here in Zoom for me.
I was just sitting down to see the slide a bit better.
No, Zoom, a different window went up, so I was not sure whether you still see my screen. So, okay. So yeah, it's my pleasure to give the introduction to the Virtual Research Environment Interest Group. And today we want to discuss about defining fairness badges for virtual research environments, virtual labs, science gateways, how people, the different names of virtual research environments worldwide. And for people who might be the first time in this session, so around research computing, we have an increased complexity of today's research questions. There's a lot going on with data management. We have new hardware and software, and always also the skills required is very complex to keep up to date with all the new developments, especially in hardware and software. And there's a greater need for openness and reproducibility. So it's driving policy questions. We have interdisciplinary distributed projects. Nowadays, really the big challenges cannot be answered by small teams or single researchers anymore. We need interdisciplinary distributed big teams. And yeah, there's an opportunity to integrate research with teaching for better workforce preparation, because yeah, the workforce needs to...
Sorry to interrupt. We don't see your slides anymore. They're not being projected out of some reason.
Okay.
Can we get the slides back on the big screen? I guess she's sharing the screen. It was just switched to the camera mode rather than the slide.
Oh, okay. So let me play it again and let me see. Yeah, something happened here in Zoom.
Saw them before. Either you stopped sharing or it's a different view that we get to see.
Yeah, let me maybe stop for a moment, because Zoom does not offer me to switch. So now you see only me, huh? And I start to share again. When I share now, do you see them again?
Yeah, now we're back to where we were before.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, something Zoom was. So yeah, so if we look then, so we need end-to-end solutions that provide broad access to such resources, to the complex researchers, and allow really everyone to tackle today's challenging science questions, and that are science gateways. So if you look at the environment around research computing, we have these lab instruments. For example, this little one on the hand that you can see there is a mini sequencer. So they had that in a lab in the UK, and they didn't allow me to leave the lab with it. We have nowadays really web agile frameworks. We have the distributed data and computing infrastructures, luckily high-speed networks, otherwise we could not do hybrid meetings. Complex research software and data and compute intensive problems, and the researcher is in the middle and needs often for research computing and to solve their science questions. They need to use all this in research computing environments. And science gateways, there's really the need for it to help them to be from a little bit overwhelmed researchers to go to happy researchers. And so we founded the Virtual Research Environment Interest Group in about now 8 years ago. And you see the different plenaries. We started at the 7th plenary with the birds of the feather, whether we, established this interest group. Then we discussed different topics around science gateways, from sustainable environments, for roadmaps, from what kind of skills do you need, what is the role of a virtual research environment, to reproducibility. And then really in the last year, we start to discuss, in the last 2 years, to discuss around fairness, how to get really science gateways that they can support fairness of data and tools, and how we can support these. And the virtual research environment interest group concept is that it's an ongoing community effort. It's open-ended, as you have seen, and we just finished the working group for virtual research environments. I will give a little bit an overview there. We had also the idea with interviews on a 10 years vision, because everything around virtual research environment, if you want something that works in 10 years, you have to start to discuss what is needed in 10 years already now. And we are happy to do more working groups. And our idea is now that we can found today a working group on fairness badges. So fair, I think in this audience, I don't really have to define it. It's the FAIR principles around findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it started with the one for 2016. And the FAIR guiding principles for scientific data management and stewardship. And there's now many additional ones: FAIR principles for research software, for models, for hardware, for different. It was really an uptake of FAIR in the last years. So, and FAIR for Science Gateways is complex. We have the target group FAIR for Science Gateways developers and providers, and FAIR for Science Gateway users. And there's a granularity. So we can really treat virtual research environments like software frameworks themselves. So we could use the FAIR principles for software, but there are also services. They have APIs. Maybe they use workflows. They include data. They have simulations. So the granularity is quite more complex than just for software frameworks. And there is also the definition between fair and versus fair enabling, because one is the science gateways and virtual research environments themselves as software framework, and the other part is the content of science gateways, the tools, the data. Science gateways themselves should be fair, that it's easily discoverable and accessible, that they can interoperate with other digital research infrastructures, and it's about the technical architecture and the components. And science gateways themselves should enable then fairness in the digital objects they create or process. So for findable, we looked at also the route so that it's easy to find the VREs to use, and also easy to find the components of VREs for both human and machines. And we want also that the digital object produced by a VRE or inside a VRE is also easy to find. So I won't go into detail for all the rules we discussed here, but I'm happy also to share the slides, and also that we can have these slides for discussions later. So for example, if we look at the findable one, so we have examples for that a VRE and its metadata are assigned globally unique and persistent identifiers. And you can find things like data site schema and resource type general service. And we have here more examples for the different principles that the VREs described with rich metadata. Or the metadata clearly and explicitly included in the identifier for the VRE. And as I said, and we also looked at it, what is really required, what is recommended, where it's relevant. So there are different levels. So required, recommended, or potential. So accessible is when once the user finds the required VRE, they need to know how to access it, even if access requires authentication and authorization. And once the user finds the required digital object hosted in a particular VRE, they also need to know how to access it. Is it via the Science Gateway, or is it maybe outside the Science Gateway? Also here we had the same structure. We defined these different routes. As I said, we can use it later for discussions. Interoperable was a little bit more complicated. So interoperates with other VREs, with storage, with compute, other software, and by exchanging data and or metadata, or through interaction via application programming interfaces, so like RESTful APIs. So also data coming out of a VRE usually needs to be integrated with other data. So it needs to interoperate with applications or workflows for analysis, storage and processing, and software simulation tools in a VRE interoperate with other software by exchanging data and or metadata. So we defined this interoperable on these different layers. So it's again between the software framework and then the content of a VRE. Also here we had recommended or required steps and reusable. So really the ultimate goal of FAIR is to optimize the reuse of digital objects. And to achieve this, metadata and data should be well described so that it can be replicated or combined in different settings. And VREs are both usable, so that it's the idea, and reusable, so really can be understood, modified, built upon. Also here we did define the basic rules we did see via the working group. And so today we want to talk about the badging systems. And what are badging systems? So it's therefore recognizing and certifying achievements in research. And yeah, so you can have different levels of badges, and you might have seen some. GitHub is giving badges, for example, and it's really to signal participation, to establish credibility and certify skills. So that is, this mixture is really nice also for the science gateways, because it can motivate researchers and display transparency, and it can enhance the engagement and promote FAIR principles, and also to foster trust and collaboration in the research community, because with the FAIR guiding principles for the different areas, we see a lot of working groups around this. We see, but there's still, what is the first step for people? How can people really use it in their daily research workflow? And I think science gateways can really help with that, to say, okay, if we can do in the science gateway the first steps, it's easier for the researchers to use it. So, and there are different badge categories dependent on what we want to really that is shown. So the signaling badges is, for example, highlighting engagement with FAIR practices. So it could be a training participation. It could be that you use software or science gateway virtual research environment that supports FAIR already. Participation badges acknowledge that you are involved in FAIR compliant initiatives. So that could be something like, oh yeah, I'm participating in the FAIR working group. Credibility badges. So that is the stage really then on technical side, certifies that data sets and tools meet FAIR criteria. And I think that is something in science gateways that can really support, because if one science gateway or frameworks are often supporting several instances. It's, if you have heard about Galaxy, or you might have heard about HubZero, about NanoHub, TAPIS frameworks, So if the framework already supports FAIR, so that could be when users use on another instance that these methods can be reused. And certification badges really verify to adherence to FAIR standards via audits or third-party evaluations. And I think that is also something I would like to discuss today. So how to approach this? How do we have maybe an instance to say, oh, how do we audit this? Do we have several instances? Do we have a peer review? I mean, there are several opportunities to set this up because this is quite new. I haven't seen that in the Science Gateway virtual research environment landscape yet. So how to start for the discussion? What are the steps to define badges? So we need the badge.
Sandra, sorry to interrupt you again. We seem to have some problem here with the video projection. So we can still hear you perfectly fine, but the video projection has just been blackened. And somebody's trying to figure out what is going on. We can hear you perfectly fine talking, but we don't see your slides anymore.
Okay, so I try to just define the steps. So maybe if you don't see it, but since we go then in the discussion and
we are back online again. See you.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I think, yeah, the first steps to define badges, what would we start with? So to define the categories we are interested in, from the different ones, you know, from really participation ones to audits. So tailored to FAIR principles and the community goals. We need to set clear criteria because it needs to be specific and measurable and verifiable, because these are the steps to really create a badge that is trusted. And yeah, the verification process, we can probably have really a mixture of peer reviews. Some could be automated checks, like a findable process is often, is a URL somewhere that can be automated. There are a couple of things that can be automated, and also expert audits. We should probably also make the badges, you know, findable, fair, and link them to metadata so that there is transparency what the process is about with badges. And we want to design and brand it so that it's consistent and can be recognized by the community and is a credible design. So integration with Science Gateway, so how to integrate badges. So there is, you know, we can embed it into workflows and existing infrastructure with Science Gateway frameworks. Use badging platforms compatible with Gateway's system, so we could look at that. And we want the integration because that it's easy for people if they use Science Gateway, that it does not create another burden, another step. There will be always a little bit of an extra step, but it should be easy. It should be, you know, simplified for awarding, displaying, and sharing, and to increase the motivation and the participation. And for ensuring trust and transparency, it's really important to go through the verification of badge criteria, to link badges to verifiable metadata and processes, and yeah, maintain transparency to build credibility. And we want that badges, because even if we can, as working group, you know, we can define them and do this all, it needs to be adapted and become meaningful and trusted indicators. So that was the idea around badges. So I know we have a couple of people online. So the idea was now to take some time, maybe around, I think in the agenda we said that we want to discuss around 20 minutes in breakout groups. So Andreas, since I'm not totally sure, does it make sense to keep the on-site group together, or do you have so many people there that you would have two groups?
On site, we are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 25 people in the room.
Okay.
Online,
I think we have online. Not totally sure. So one is you, that means we have a couple of hosts and co-hosts, so does it look correctly that we have online maybe? I think we don't have working group. There's an interpreter. It does not look like that we have online enough for working group. And is there someone online I overlook? Please, please bear with me. Otherwise,
yeah.
good.
But my audio is back. Now you can hear me again.
Oh,
The
sorry.
audio dropped off, or the microphone was not available. So we're about 25 people in the room, so we can easily discuss it here on site. That should work fine. The only downside is if we do the discussion here, I don't want everybody to walk up to the microphone because that kind of slows down the discussion process, even if we pass on a microphone. So, yeah, but if we need to walk around all across the room, I guess let's discuss it on site here.
Yeah, so maybe what we can do, let me stop sharing for a moment. So we have a notes document. Maybe it still makes sense to break it out in maybe 2 groups that people hear each other better with 25 people if they sit more closely together.
No, I guess in the room we do it as one group.
Okay. Yeah, I think online we don't really have.
No participants online. Okay, then we'll just do the group session here. But in this case, I guess we might need a microphone after all, because otherwise you can't hear us discussing. So we would need an. And we got 2 of these. So I can keep talking while throwing the microphone to the audience. Sandra, do you want to start with the questions? Do you want to project the slide again with the questions, or do we want to start with a more general discussion first on what we want to achieve with the badges? And I've got somebody who actually wants to contribute.
Wait, something jumped on Zoom. I can share again, absolutely.
It's better now. You hear me? Yes. Okay. So it's difficult to start, but I have a question. I'm wondering about the FAIR principles assessment to attribute a badge. How do you assess the conformity of a data set, for instance, with the FAIR principles? Because it's something very hard today. We know that some of them are not automated today, and there is a big discrepancy between automated system. See the apple to apple paper from Wilkinson that shows that we have some notation between 3 under 20 or 11 or 16 under 20. So that's my first question. My second is about the governance. Who decide and how you decide to credit? How do you organize people to decide this kind of badge attribution?
Well, that is, I think, exactly part of the working group then, because we are not sure about the process, how to set this up the best way yet. That is why we want the working group being founded, and that we prepared with this session, that we discuss what are the topics we have to solve in the working group. How will this be? What are, how can the community trust it? How do we, involve experts, make a peer review, maybe have something, for example, I'm leading also the Center of Excellence for Science Gateways in the US. So we could have worldwide several instances where we say, oh yeah, we come together and we start with instances like the Center of Excellence or another institute in Europe, in Latin America, in Australia, where we say, or projects who say, yeah, we are part of it and we are happy to support with peer review to look at badges. So this is all not set up yet. So therefore, I think we need the working group to define these things. So how to define it that the community will trust it.
Okay, so peer review is the main system, for instance, that is expected today at this step.
So I would think that we start with peer review because I don't think that there is an instance yet worldwide that can give fair badges that people are convinced that this is, trustworthy. Let's say it like this. I did look for it, but I couldn't find anything that would support this yet.
Hi, Sandra. Rob Quick from Indiana University. I think the first step is really trying to determine what information these badges convey to someone who visits a gateway, right? So if someone visits a gateway and sees a badge, what is that telling them? And I think the first step is to determine what information is pushed forward by these badges. That being said, I'm working in leading a badging project for Access CI, which is the HPC infrastructure within the U.S. And in fact, we have Science Gateway badges. Those badges convey how integrated you are with the cyber infrastructure, what type of services you have, such as what data transfer services you may have, what ticketing services you may have for support of the gateway. So I think that the kind of initial step there is what information do these badges convey, which then also projects what value they have to the gateway administrator or someone building a gateway.
Absolutely.
So in my I very much like the idea, but what we need to decide first is really at which level we want to assign the badges. So the granularity question that you put up before, Sandra, because it's the whole discussion is different if we discuss the badges being awarded at a science gateway at an infrastructure level, so big compute center, or whether it's specialized services that might be offered by smaller institutions for very specific tasks. Because if you're talking about an entire infrastructure, a supercomputing center, then a different reviewing process can be applied as if we talk about specific compute services that are running somewhere in the cloud by a specific institution for sometimes even just a limited period of time with no long-term guarantees, where you can't go into in-depth audits coming on site and checking the service quality. So I think we need to discuss both the granularity and then what is the kind of trust information that we want to convey, and what kind of information is also needed by those who want to utilize that service infrastructure VRE, basically.
And the badges that we're considering are user-facing, right? So they deliver some information to the user about about something, what level of integration or what services are available or such. So they are user-facing badges is the general idea.
Yeah.
Before we continue with the discussion, I would like to bring up that we have collaboration notes where everyone who's interested also and is in the room can sign up for. If you go to the program and I see, yes, so Christian and Rob already signed up for, so maybe an attendee check-in would be good. So if you have your laptop around and could sign up in the table, that would be great. And if we can find maybe someone who would like to take some notes that we don't lose all the great ideas. Someone in the room interested to support with taking some notes?
Yeah, I can try to take notes on the tablet while walking around, but not typing into the collaborative notes right away, because that would be a mess if I.
Okay. Yeah. So just
And I'm happy to help take some notes, but while I'm commenting, of course, that gets very difficult.
yeah, we'll aggregate them anyway in the end and recreate some parts from memory. Short-term memory is still reasonably fine.
it should be. Yeah. I only wanted, yeah, because normally if people are not signing up in the collaborative node with their name, it's hard to get it later done. So it would be really great if people might want to log into the collaborative nodes. And you can get to the collaborative nodes from the program if you click on the session, and it's in the first line. That would be great. Thank you so much.
So for the working group, Sandra, if we wanted to sketch a case statement in that direction, I think, so one of the issues, as I mentioned, what we need to address is probably what we want to certify, because you also had whoever gets active in training or is actively involved in the community. This is something that we wouldn't assign to a service that's running, but rather to the staff that's working, and that might be on the individual, it might be on an organizational unit that they're actively providing trainings and so on. So whatever, if we come up with some of the categories like staff, organization, service, or entire infrastructure, and then basically do the kind of requirements that we also have for the badges, because a person usually won't be, yeah, an ID can be fair, but persons usually are not easily reusable.
No.
So we need to really come up with also what is the need, because as you said, one is for branding, for creating visibility. That's the kind of badges that you wear to show that you're part of something. Others are essential for others to trust the service, the institution, and so on. So I guess this matrix is something that we will have ultimately to pick apart. And the video is gone again. But I guess you can hear us still, is it?
I can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Perfectly fine.
Thank you.
So since we don't need the slides right now, that's okay.
Yeah, I wanted to say I took the slides out for a moment because I like this open discussion, and we should have done that. If there are any questions also about the slides or anything else, that should have been the first step. Yeah. So any comments back about the slides and how to start from here is really helpful. Any further comments? I see in the notes someone create a matrix of dimensions. Yeah, that is probably a good idea to see, yeah, how do we start? What are the dimensions we want to have a look at? Because one thing is we have different target groups with science gateways. One side is the developers, providers. The other side are researchers. So we probably we need to distinguish between the target group, what kind of badges make sense for them. Because if researchers, for example, are using science gateways, so they're part of the FAIR process then if the science gateway supports FAIR. So that is great. But users can normally not influence how fair the science gateway framework is, except for really giving feedback and giving the feedback to developers and providers what additionally would be yeah, they would like to see. So I think that the role definition is a big thing. Yeah.
So I guess this is a very important point, because something I think we also need to take a look at is scenarios. What do the stakeholders actually need? Why, or which aspects of fairness are important for the users or for the stakeholders involved in the environment? Because fair, just for the matter of being fair, yeah, I mean, that's not getting us anywhere. But what is it that a researcher wants to see answered? What kind of assertions about a service, about an infrastructure need to be made so that they can, whatever, confidently use a service to produce research output that then lives up to expectations in terms of quality, reproducibility, long-term availability, comparability, whatever other abilities we want to add to that. So I think if we mentally now sketch such a case statement, those user scenarios or stakeholder scenarios, I guess, would be a crucial point to start from in order to know what to put into which specific type of batch. And there's a comment here.
Yes, I didn't present me. So Romain David from ERINA and France. I would like to say about the FAIR principles. Yes, that's a good idea to try to determine what are the criteria that are to be focused in this kind of environment. And on my point of view, the most useful should be the most difficult. One is the provenance. The provenance aspects are crucial when you are in this kind of environment, and that's also criteria that is not on the mode yes or no. It's the level of quality of provenance that is linked also to the level of quality of data, but the level of quality of workflows that can also be implemented, or the level of quality of vocabularies that can be implemented, or that can be linked to the data that could increase the interoperability. So for me, there are two criteria. So the criteria R2, if I remember well, and the criteria, so for the provenance, and I2 for interoperability for FAIR vocabularies.
So
Absolutely.
it basically means we not only need, or it's not an assertion about the service or the institution, but of the output that the specific service or infrastructure produces. That should be core to the batching.
Yeah, on my point of view, if you have through the badge a way to say, okay, if you have the badge, you have the certification that when the reusability will be maximum,
Yep.
through a good vocabulary, through some quality aspect, not only FAIR, because FAIR is it's centered on the reusability, but if it can be reusable but not reused, just because the data is not curated in-house. Or for instance, I have a short story to tell about we had 13 research infrastructure working together and thinking on how to qualify metadata commonly. And the first thing to see was what are the metadata to qualify metadata to qualify quality of data in the system, and there were no metadata about quality of data in the upper system at the research infrastructure level.
Okay.
The only one was one research infrastructure that had the date of the last curation.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of information to reach a page could be really great, I guess. Mm-hmm. If I understand well what you want to do.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfectly. Now I have two mics again. This makes sense. I think one of the difficulties we'll be facing is that when we are talking about, badging services and infrastructures, that we need to actually achieve a much more fine granular level of specification, because specifying anything in machine readable form, that's trivial. So we fulfill the criteria, but actually establishing interoperability between services doesn't require us just to have an API that's community agreed, but making sure that those two APIs talk to each other. And that's a much more challenging task, especially if we go cross-disciplinary or cross-geographic regions, where we all have that's the nice thing about standards. There are so many out there that it's easy to follow and be compliant to one of them, but that doesn't help us with interoperability. So the question is, how strict should any such batching system be? Because if we want to have adoption, then it needs to be flexible and generic, and that's why the FAIR principles are really good at that level. They provide generic guidelines. but two services that are fair don't necessarily need to be interoperable, although they both fulfill the I criterion perfectly well. And so how do we deal with that issue? Because I think ultimately we need to address these difficult tasks. Now that we've picked the low-hanging fruits of claiming something is interoperable because it does follow some standards, we need to actually have a machine actionable way to ensuring whether two specific services fulfill the I criteria in a specific setting. And I guess that's something that will be essential if we want to have that kind of interoperability. Or you quoted provenance as an example, which I think is an excellent one. Any research infrastructure can output some provenance information, whatever the log files, and that's machine actionable as well. We can parse them, we can search them for string patterns, but whether they are prof O or not, and is prof O then the only one that should be supported? It's the balance between flexibility and restrictiveness, ultimately, I think, that we need to tackle. And I mean, from the European perspective, I guess this will become a very burning issue very soon, because now with the European Open Science Cloud launching its nodes that actually should be interoperable services, where users can then freely shift compute from one side to another, depending on where the data is, or depending on where compute resources are currently available at the whatever lowest cost or whatever other criteria we want to apply, then these need to really be interoperable on a very, very specific technical level.
Perhaps I hope I'm not in the scope or out of the scope, but for me, interoperability, it's not only interoperability between machine, it's also interoperability between machine and humans. And often when developers are pushing some API, they forget that a human will try to implement or to integrate it. So you have to understand what is behind or how it is done. So at least for provenance, but I think for lots of other aspects, when you have an API with at least 100 of things, you are not able to integrate that and to have a good appropriation of the service quality. So there is an effort to do, I think, for the accessibility of things.
Mm-hmm. Having the usability as part of the essential criteria. Any other comments?
And so I think defining what is the value to the person either running or developing the gateway, is it to say, I'm fair, or this gateway is fair? Is that the end case? What I think defining that value, and there are a lot of things there, the automated monitoring as to whether the badges are in place and continuing. This sounds like quite a bit of not necessarily a lot of work to define, but a lot of work to actually implement and maintain over time. So I think a plan for that is also should be discussed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there is, in my opinion, there's two approaches that one can try to build and design the system, which I think will be extremely hard and will not work, or we'll see it emerge because certain infrastructures want to or need to collaborate for specific tasks, and then standardization that emerges rather than being decreed usually tends to be better suited to meet the needs of the stakeholders. But that's my personal opinion. I mean, that's also like a lot of the industry standards emerge because whatever 2 or 3 big players want to get together, and once 2 or 3 are following and adopting a certain solution, it's easier for smallers to just if that's freely available, grab it and roll it out on their side as well.
Right, and I think that goes back to the question as to who's sponsoring these badges or who's standing behind these badges as to being the not necessarily certification authority, but the authority who's saying this badge is valid.
So if we want to develop such badges, crafting them on paper might be a useful exercise, but I guess what we need is ultimately use cases to work from. And that will also be sponsoring, whatever then the supporting agency is behind it, but we need to have some concrete need-driven approach, in my opinion, to make this useful. So the question is, what kind of infrastructures would be good starting points, or what kind of services, or?
So yes, it would be, I think maybe picking a handful of gateways or VREs to kind of interview as to what they might need out of this might be the starting point, right? To start those use cases, to see what their use case would be for progressing towards badging.
I mean, yeah, I like the idea to start also with frameworks, science gateway frameworks, but I think also we should have user also stories of researchers. What would they like to see? Because at the end we have more really researchers who could benefit from it than in science gateway frameworks, because some, you know, we could have directly with some gateway frameworks like Galaxy, yeah, almost 1 million users. So that would be helpful to say, okay, what do the 1 million users want to see if they are Galaxy users? Well, what is their benefit for their own research? I think if we can define that, that would be helpful besides the providers.
I don't know if I'm able to say that. I think that if I am in an environment like Galaxy, my main purpose is I'm not using all things knowing what is in. Often it's black box. Even if you don't want to have black box, you have things that you can't determine it. You have functions, you have libraries and things like that. So having this kind of badge could be a certification of, okay, I don't know exactly what is in, but it's fair. Fair, not fair like fair principles only, but fair with all the quality levels required. And I think that's one thing I wanted, I should expect if I use this kind of system. And for instance, I told about vocabularies. You know that lots of people don't understand really well what is an ontology, what are concepts, what are instances of the concept and properties that are linked, and how concepts are linked. It's not their job, so they have to just understand that this vocabulary is compliant with the requirements. And for that, knowing that vocabulary is fair, it's not very easy for somebody. Lots of vocabularies, most of the vocabularies are in PDF. So that means that they are not usable, and indeed, they are not usable in the VRE, but in the VRE, even if they are machine readable, they could not have lots of quality requirement, community requirement also. And the aspect community in a badge, in kind of badge, could be really useful also. Just a point of view.
Absolutely. Any further comments? Oh, I see me now.
Maybe some general comments. So I'm Christian Paget from Surfax in Toulouse, in France, and I would say that for the badge, of course, the as it has been said, there's no yes or no necessarily for all the criteria we can have. I think it would the suggestion to have a matrix. I think it's a good thing. It could be a matrix that where we have specific objective based criteria that address users, but also stakeholders, developers. So all the aspects should be covered, and then we can have a rating and then try to assess if the rating is high enough for the badge for different aspects. I think we really need something objective, and also that we have different aspects and criteria depending on the not only on the users but also on other people using the infrastructure. and the VREs. So I think the idea of having a matrix is very good, but it needs to be really thought about, because there are many aspects that we need to be covered to be really fair.
Thank you.
That's good. Yeah.
Another point that we might discuss is whether FAIR, I mean, apart from FAIR being very prominent, obviously guiding all kind of developments now across all ranges, whether FAIR is really the core set that we need to address, and especially in its entirety. So I mean, I'm just hypothesizing now, but given the way researchers work currently, access to whatever high performance computing infrastructure is not so much a problem of findability, I would assume, because usually your institution is attached to one, or there is domain specific ones where the big data is available. This might change in the future as work becomes, as you nicely sketched, Sandra, in the slides, as work becomes more interdisciplinary, as smaller, more specialized services pop up. But I would assume, you know, if some researcher needs access to whatever an HPC cluster somewhere, they usually will have guidance from their institution on which ones they do have access to, where, you know, payment is being handled and so on. So the question is whether these needs will change as we become more interdisciplinary, as there is a wider variety of specialized service becoming available. And so whether findability, for example, is of the highest priority initially, whereas things such as automatically documenting the provenance and focusing on the reusability and traceability of the outputs produced might be more essential for a researcher at the time being, which might change completely in 3 to 5 years from now, obviously. But whether we also should, you know, think in this FAIR core set right from the start, or whether we might, you know, just start from actually the user requirements and needs, what they would like to see in order to utilize a specific environment.
Yeah, and so I'm in agreement with that. I think maybe badges based on functionalities, specific functionalities that the users are looking for, maybe a more appropriate way, or at least more useful to the user who's coming in to do an analysis immediately, is they need to have access to a high throughput or a high performance computing center. They may need certain data access to certain data sets, right, or certain repositories, and those may be more useful to an end user who's just coming to get some work done. FAIR is more focused on a little bit of the long-term sustainability or long-term processes that come out of this, and I think going back to the use cases, what is it important for that user to need to know to start getting the work done, and start from there.
Perhaps an evidence, but you said we could focus on the output, unfair output. My first reaction should be to say, if you want fair output, you need fair process. And what is needed in the VRE is to have a badge, because people don't want to study FAIR principles before using a VRE, and the badge on actions, concrete actions to be fair could help, because you can comply with several FAIR principles in the same time. Sometime, for instance, by a common action on metadata, and trying to translate FAIR into actions that can permit to attribute a badge on a package of action, for instance. It's a kind of gaming of research on that, but that's also the advantage to show to the researchers that some things have to be done only one time, some things have to be done frequently, each time, sometime, and some of them are not dependent on him, but just on the choice of the tools or services that he will connect to his research. For instance, vocabularies indeed, but there are others like process libraries and things like that. That could be really important, for instance, stable and sustainable environment and things like that.
I like that because it, on the one hand, allows the infrastructure to signal to the researcher on the amount of effort that they're saved from doing, again, because some things are automated and provided directly by the infrastructure. On the other hand, I think it would also provide an incentive for the infrastructure to invest into building all these additional services, because, I mean, something that we also need to be aware of, those infrastructures are out there, they're successfully operating, they are serving the users' needs at the moment, but anything that comes on top basically requires additional investment, additional effort to deploy these increased fairness level services. And so the badge could then also provide an incentive for them to invest or to actually justify the investment that is needed to develop those, enhanced APIs, enhanced documentation, automated documentation. So it's actually now working for both directions, for the researcher, because they save time and effort whenever they perform experiments, whatever runs in that infrastructure. And also on the infrastructure, because it makes them a more attractive infrastructure and kind of shows that they're investing to provide the next generation services.
I like this idea to use badge as incentives, and I guess that it's also because we called about badge on digital object, but badge can also be for actions or for the skills of the component of those skills proved by the researcher or the technical person through the using of this good practice. For instance, we are developing in the OSCAR project in EOSC in Europe, competence centers. And one main component for competence centers is humans. And behind service also, there are also humans. If you want to reuse data, if you don't have somebody to say, okay, you see all the data cleaned, but this bias is not very evident. So having a contact person, so a human behind data, it's more difficult to reuse things. So we can't provide or sell something like it's completely automated and without human behind, and we have to think about the interface and the incentive to push people also to support and also to train to win the upper level in the game.
So basically, it would also require us in some form to define a procedure of how to get there, from wherever infrastructures are, and they are at different levels, and services are at different levels, and to then allow them also to justify investments in that direction or request investments in a certain direction. Because I agree, I mean, it's, yeah, so levels, but I wouldn't call them maturity levels, because that's has a different, it has an evaluation mindset behind it.
You can have levels not on assessment of the knowledge, but on the capability to use tools together. That's not really classification of peoples. That's important because we have in-house competition in our world. But trying to make this in a better sense of collaboration could be great.
And so let me say, from experience in the other project that I'm working on, a badging project with, we have roadmaps, right? So these are the steps you need to take to achieve this badge, and those roadmaps are need to be simplified, because if it becomes too complex, then people are not going to see the effort worth getting the badges. So I think that having a step-by-step process or checklist or a roadmap to where the badging are, how to achieve each of the badges, right? Because badgements are usually saying you've achieved some amount of fairness in this case, or findability. So I think that's another step, is starting with the use cases, but there also has to be the effort to put a roadmap to achieve each of the badges that you do offer.
Yeah, with the levels, I totally agree also that it has to have roadmaps. It has to be clear. It has to be, transparent. How to achieve it and when do you get these badges, because that plays also into the trustworthiness and the credibility. Because if users cannot find out, or developers, what is really the way to get a badge, then they won't trust it because if they don't understand or don't see how to do this. So I fully agree on that. I also think that badges, that I think with a different level, that we have better more levels and fine-grained, because they're different. Some science gateway frameworks, or let's say science gateways, if it's has some proprietary software, for example, and offers it to their users, they won't have maybe all these things fair can measure, but which is not a disadvantage in that regard. It's just like, yeah, it's made with proprietary software. That is a goal, because that community needs the software. So it shouldn't be then a disadvantage not to have this one badge. It should be only clear, oh yeah, this one here is missing because of the intent of, you know, of the science gateway or the software that is included. So I think we need to be very clear that some of the badges, it shows, of course, what is possible, but not having a badge does also not mean that there is less quality. It only means that exactly this characteristic is not provided, for probably good reasons often, or maybe still in work. There's a difference between saying this will not happen because of the kind of a science gateway that is provided, or to say, oh yeah, we can still work on it, but that is a decision then really the providers and developers have to take.
No, I fully agree. And just picking the example that you made on proprietary software, for example, from a researcher's perspective, the question is not whether the software is proprietary or not. The key question is, can that experiment be reproduced 5 years from now? Or can I get comparable data so that I can compare, whatever new data I have 5 years from now using the old software and, build up a provenance trail of the research experiments. And I know that in some cases in our infrastructure, we operate 10-year-old, 15-year-old software purely for comparability reasons, for benchmarking against a new version of some software, a new approach, methodological approach on the same data. And so I guess the difference ultimately between a research infrastructure and any efficient compute infrastructure is certain additional services that are only needed or predominantly needed in research and not in deployment, operational, or commercial settings. And so I guess these are some of the aspects that we should focus on in terms of those badges. So when a service is being offered, can you provide certain guarantees that I can reuse that service, I can call upon that service at least for the next 1 or 2 years? Because if you start whatever your PhD investigation, you use a certain tool to transform data or compute whatever output it is, and then half a year later or a year later, or worse, even 2.5 years later, just before you're about to submit, the whole thing dies. So it's kind of those assertions that I think are essential to differentiate research infrastructure, research services, trustworthy, reliable research services from any kind of service.
Yeah, I think one universal badge may be that commitment to maintain that for a certain period, right? As you said, no one wants to find a great tool and then the funding ends and the tool goes away and you can no longer use it. So that may be one very basic fundamental badge that could be implemented in, though again here you're need to trust the gateway itself or the VRE itself, that they're going to put a realistic date on that, because again from that side you want that gateway to last forever. Your goal when you create something is that it's going to be around and active for a long time. So measuring that even becomes very difficult. There can be a commitment to maintain or a funding cycle or something, but that is a human conveyed number that may have it may be inaccurate based on the developer's vision that they hope that their gateway is there.
Yeah.
And sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And I think especially with tools, so that would be, for example, for me, data dependent on the formats is probably, much longer that we can access it somehow if we use formats where we can still have some browsing, editing, probabilities. Tools is something else, and that comes back then maybe to the question that maybe we have to say fair badges for tools have only a certain lifespan. How, if a tool is there, maybe it is something to say, oh, after 3 years we check whether it's still there. Maybe that is something you get a badge only for 3 years for tools, and then it has to be assigned again. Maybe that makes sense for software. And it's 3 years is only an example. Maybe that's too short. I don't know, but some tools might be also made for that they need to have a totally new version after a while.
I mean,
And
I
I think
would,
that makes sense from a process standpoint to renew or to check them occasionally. I don't know if that makes as much sense from the user standpoint who it will, unless that badge has a specific date on it or an expiration, something along those lines. Again, the thought process there is that they want to know that it's going to be around for a while when you start using it.
I mean, this is not anything unusual. I mean, we find that even in the commercial world where you have guarantees on certain hardware availability, guarantees on certain maintenance contracts, and the same for software, guaranteed support for a certain product over a certain period of time. Disaster might strike and that might not be fulfillable, but on average, I mean, that's what companies, partners, institutions guarantee. And I think something like that should come with every software. And I think since you mentioned 3 years, 3 years is definitely not sufficient because that wouldn't allow you to even use it at the start of your PhD if the software is there. Don't touch it if the guarantee is only 3 years, because we all know that PhD might take a bit more than that.
Yeah, and I also, if you are coming at it and you've got like a 3 year, no, let's forget 3 years. If you've got a 5-year badge and you come to it in year 4.5, what are you getting? So maybe the answer is to have the badge be for the process or something about, when does the infrastructure get rid of a piece of research software? And can the researcher take confidence in the process that what if they still need it, it's going to be made available.
So the badge basically would mean that for each service offered by an infrastructure, there is a guaranteed lifetime that the institution commits to sustain the service, and then that might be prolonged or not, but a guaranteed lifetime commitment for any service operated by an institution, that would be what the badge should check. And how long that is will depend on the type of service and its use ultimately.
Perhaps a comment on an example. I was wondering how badges are working. In other words, we have, for instance, developer communities like GitHub. They have kinds of badge that are existing. I don't know how they exist, how they do exactly. Some badge you have them one time and after it's for your life. Others can be for periods. And I have another example. Perhaps it could be inspiring for you. The Word Content Accessibility Guideline. I had a training on that specifically. And that's interesting because, it's comparable to FAIR principles on their implementation. It's hard. It's not right or wrong. You have several levels. And this accessibility guideline give lots of criteria. So it's impossible for somebody that don't know to implement them. But if you follow certain principles in action, you will check the criteria. And the criteria is linked to the criteria update of the standard. So when the standard is updated, the badge is erased. And that's a good concept, for instance, for vocabularies, indeed, because you have to check that your vocabulary is, again, at this time, aligned with the practice of your community. But it's also the same for workflows or for the environment that you use. Is the environment up to date, secure, and things like that? So I think that for the lifetime of the badge, it could be related to external elements.
I mean, reflecting on the discussion now, and since Sandra, what you wanted to do is launch a working group on that. My impression is that solving all the problems that we've been discussing now won't be achievable in 18 months. So I think we need to narrow down the scope significantly to get something as a concrete output, as concrete recommendations that an infrastructure, a service provider can implement in the broadest sense of that word, so technically, but also organizationally, so that they take certain steps and expose certain characteristics, provide certain assertions that we then might ultimately decide, okay, that's worthy of one specific type of badge. But I doubt whether we will be able to achieve the entire set of badges that you had up there across the entire matrix that we discussed initially. So I think we will have to narrow the scope to some specific use case. It might be whatever a specific service. So what are the assertions on specific services that want to be provided? So in terms of how the output is presented, service guarantees, operational guarantees, and so on. And maybe another example is an infrastructure. What kind of guarantees would the infrastructure need to provide? And maybe see whether that is already sufficient to define then certain badge criteria. Would that be also your view, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also that we should start with one of the stakeholders. So science gateways are made for researchers, of course, but if we don't start with the developers or providers, then it's hard, to do fair in science gateways if the developers don't believe in doing these fair badges. So I think we have to start with a developer provider group to be part of it. And maybe then the really researcher group would be a next step, a next working group. So I think a working group, if we could start with fairness badges for the frameworks, for the infrastructure, and yeah, maybe already including the tools that are provided via Science Gateway and the data. But that is not really, I think, the scope we can, in 18 months, mostly achieve. And then really, I think we cannot have then all 4 kind of badges, of course. Then it's really more to find out the process, to find out also a process that the community picks up and, and trust. So therefore, I think discussing in the working group, how do we start the best way with peer review, with expert review? What are the steps there? So I think that would be good, because
Yeah, I mean, I might even exclude the peer review at this stage, because if we start with self-assessment, I guess that might already be, for 18 months, that's already quite an achievement if we get the stakeholders, so the infrastructures, the service providers, to say, okay, here is the commitments that we would like to be able to make, and here is how we would collect evidence for that. And here is what we would communicate to the researchers, and then checking with the researchers whether that kind of information is what they would be looking for. And if we achieve that by 18 months, I guess it's already quite ambitious. And anything beyond it, how to review that, how to audit it, I agree will be needed, but I would tend to even exclude that from the ambition for the first 18 months.
okay.
But
I mean,
that's my gut feeling.
I mean, we hopefully, I mean, we have now for the session only 12 minutes left, so maybe it's good to start to discuss a little bit how to go from here. I mean, we will put out in the interest group, and I hope you are all joined the interest group on the RDA website. We will put out there that we work on the working group on the application. So I think one further meeting then online would be good for people who are interested. And we create a Google Doc where everyone can contribute, and where we drill down as I said, also with my presentation, I left it on purpose broad because I wanted to have the discussion, what do we need to start on to work? Because it has so many aspects. From stakeholders, the complexity of science gateways and their content. So I think it would be good really to start from here to create a Google Doc, have the first frame for the 18 months, because the 18 months given, I don't, that is given by RDA, and also the structure how to apply for the working group. So that would be something I would aim for, it that we can submit it in the next 3-4 months, so that we could have maybe a first meeting of the working group at the next RDA meeting. Does that sound manageable for everyone? I know there's the end of the year but 3-4 months for creating maybe really a vision for the working group, and one further meeting would be possible.
So from my experience, sounds very ambitious. So it really depends on how active we get the community to discuss any online document that we are drafting. From my experience, is the drafting process, there is a very small group of people who are actually contributing and commenting on it. So what I would suggest is that a small group drafts the case statement, proposes certain activities. We do a BOF session at the next plenary, which will be an online one, a virtual one, where then there is larger community discussion on a concrete text. Because once you have concrete text up, there's way more people, criticizing certain lines, adding stuff that is missing. So you get a lot of feedback from that process, and then submit it to TAB for review. And then there is another community review process and so on. So even that process, it's up for community review for a month, takes some time. And since starting 6 months later doesn't mean you're losing any time, because it only means that the 18 months clock starts ticking a bit later, which is actually helpful because it buys you 6 months of thinking time, of shaping and scoping it. I would suggest aiming for a BOF session for the next virtual plenary, and then maybe a kickoff at the next physical plenary. But again, just my pessimistic intent.
I'm with you. I think I'm always a little bit too positive with my time. And then, yeah, I'm also happy to do that. I mean, we had great discussions today, and everyone who wants to contribute, so maybe we start after we have cleaned up the notes, and put this in the collaborative notes from this session. We create another Google Doc where we put the first text in, where people can start to contribute and discuss. I think that
my advice on that should be to perhaps also try to consent some key peoples to reinforce the group, to be sure that at the BOF you will have all expected person, and perhaps other, if you can open a call or organize a webinar enough before the plenary to consent people.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. So putting out, once we have a first draft of a case statement, or at least potential topics and action lines, disseminating that widely and organizing a call where people can comment on. The other thing I think we need to take a look at, since you mentioned Oscars, we should take a look at the ongoing initiatives and projects that actually have funding to do, because there is a lot of work in that direction anyway. I mean, this is not something that's coming out of the blue. So seeing and checking which initiatives actually might align, because then there is actually, for those groups, there is actually funding to do the work, which needs to come from elsewhere, because REA is just the environment to link it.
Absolutely. Yeah, doing a little bit of research which groups are thinking in that direction. And if it's around certifications, even if it's not badges, but smaller, mini certifications or something that needs a similar thinking about it. So I think that is a good idea.
And pulling in groups who are in similar environments who are doing badging projects. It might not be the exact gateways, but I think talking to them and thinking of some of the potential issues that they've had may be a good way to inform that initial draft document, that we're not falling into any major pitfalls that may be out there that other people have already identified. So getting, I think, some community input from people who are doing badging in similar areas is a good idea, at least during that draft document stage.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely would also like, to discuss with people who do the badges, for example, for GitHub. That would be really nice to have them in a discussion about this. They have experience.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we still need to do is also scan the RDA working groups that are in existence at the moment, which ones, whose output we can actually feed into. And I mean, the ones that come to my mind immediately is whatever FAIR for ML, because that has a lot to do with the provenance and documenting it. There was or still is a working group that does PID for sensors or PID for physical objects and things like that. And again, there has been so many activities in the past years that we need to scan those outputs and see both the results of those as well as the people who wrote them, because it's the minds that we want, not just the PDFs, to feed into it, because I guess then that gives us a much stronger starting position and avoids us having to reinvent the wheel.
So with Roman and myself here, we're also part of the tab. So we part of the tab process is making sure that you find related working groups and try to collaborate with them and make sure that there are no duplicate efforts being had. So I think we can help if Roman is joining this group. I didn't see him in the notes, but that may be that he didn't get in there. So we're perfectly, we have that view of the overall process and can help.
Good. That's extremely helpful, because the time when one could have an overview of all the working groups that have ever existed in the RDA is long gone.
Yes.
I remember those days when we knew who everybody was around here.
Yes.
Any other comments? Anybody else? Those who want to be informed about the initiative, please make sure you put your names and email addresses in the collaborative notes, because otherwise we have no way of reaching out to you. The link, Sandra, can you project the link to the note? But I guess, I mean, it is, or put it in the chat.
So yes, let me put it in the chat.
And I guess there will also be the link. The link is also on the interest group website where the event is linked. Or just drop us an email, Sandra, myself, or to the interest group in general, to the mailing list, then we pick up names there.
So you can see here in the program, that's linked in the first, just because that is easier to find if you don't get this directly, and we did not create a shorter URL, but if you are on the chat, I know that the Google Docs is always.
So typing it off from the screen is impossible anyway, because the font is too small, but if the link is in the chat and if it's on the website anyway, then that's fine. I mean, that's maybe something that we should pass on, since tab is present. I guess that's something that would be useful, that we can on demand, if there is an initiative for starting a working group, so nothing existing yet, to easily set up a mailing list where people can subscribe to.
Yes, we can do something like a Google group. Yeah.
Just something that might be useful for, kickstarting these initiatives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know that anything exists like that currently, but you can reach out directly to the tab, or to, again, myself and Roman are here in the room and part of the conversation, so we're perfectly willing to help out.
Because I also know from another off session that we have been recently going through is you collect a list of participants in the online notes, and then you need to create your own mailing list somewhere. And I guess doing that right somewhere where people can subscribe and unsubscribe. So since the infrastructure is there for the existing groups, there should be one for non-existing groups. Yeah, something like that. That would be convenient. Good. Any other comments in the audience. Did anybody else join online? Is there, Sandra, do you see anybody else who is?
We have, some people online and some did also talk. Yeah, anything from online audience? With that, yeah, we are 1 minute before and
Quickly
the
on
end of
time.
the session. Yeah, thank you very much for joining and your interest and for really lively discussion. This is really great. So with that, I hope that you all enjoy. Oh yeah, online the sessions to join online like me. I still have a little bit FOMO that I'm not in Costa Rica, but so with that, I give it back to Andreas.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. And I guess all that I have to do is thank everybody for being here. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you will be contributing to the draft case statement, and looking forward to seeing you again at the very likely BOF session at the next plenary, and maybe during a call in between when we discuss the way to get there. Thanks a lot. I guess is coffee break now? I assume so. Okay, so grab your coffee. Thank you.